I stood in my empty backyard, staring at the 4 concrete footprints where my children's playground had been just 2 days ago. The custom wooden swing set that had taken David and me 6 months to save for, the climbing wall that Jake had finally mastered last month, the little fort where Sophie held her teddy bear tea parties every afternoon. All of it was gone. In its place was nothing but disturbed grass and the lingering scent of fresh concrete dust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emily Martinez, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I'd be calling the police on my own in-laws. The worst part wasn't even the missing playground equipment. It was the note I'd found taped to my back door when David and I returned from our anniversary weekend in Chicago. Written in Linda's precise handwriting on her monogrammed stationery, it read, Emily and David, quote, "We sold the playground equipment to help fund our home theater renovation. The children barely used it anyway, and it was an eyesore in such a beautiful neighborhood. The buyers paid cash and removed everything yesterday. You're welcome. Love, Mom and Dad Martinez. You're welcome." As if stealing $4,500 worth of playground equipment from their own grandchildren was some kind of favor. David stood beside me in the backyard, reading the note for the 3rd time, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like heartbreak. We'd only been gone for 48 hours to celebrate our 10-year anniversary at the Palmer House Hotel. His parents had offered to watch Jake and Sophie, insisting they stay at their house just 4 doors down on Maple Drive so the kids could have a sleepover with Grandma and Grandpa. "They used our house key," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building in my chest. "The key we gave them for emergencies." "This has to be a mistake," David muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Mom wouldn't just sell the kids' playground without asking us." I turned to look at him, this man I'd married a decade ago, who still wanted to believe the best about his parents, despite mountains of evidence to the contrary. Linda Martinez had never approved of me, never missed an opportunity to mention that David could have done better, never let me forget that I came from the wrong side of Oakville, with my community college education and my job managing the local veterinary clinic. But this crossed every line I thought even she wouldn't dare cross. The sound of our back gate opening interrupted my thoughts. Jake and Sophie came running across the yard, their overnight bags bouncing against their small frames. Sophie's face was streaked with tears, and Jake's jaw was set in that stubborn way that reminded me so much of David. "Mom!" Sophie threw herself into my arms, her 6-year-old body trembling with sobs. "Grandma said you didn't want our playground anymore. She said you told her to get rid of it because we were too old for it." My heart shattered as I knelt down to her level, smoothing her dark curls away from her face. "Sweetheart, that's not true. Mommy and Daddy never said that." Jake crossed his arms, his 8-year-old face serious beyond his years. "I told Grandma she was lying, but she said you were just too embarrassed to tell us yourself because you needed the money for grown-up things." David's face went white. "She said what?" "And then these men came with a big truck," Sophie continued through her tears, "and they took apart my fort and put it in their truck. I asked Grandma to call you, but she said you were too busy with your romantic getaway to be bothered with children's toys." I felt something cold and dangerous settle in my stomach. Linda hadn't just stolen from us. She'd traumatized our children and made them complicit in their own loss. She'd made them believe that David and I had abandoned their happiness for our own convenience. "Daddy, are W poor?" Jake asked quietly. "Is that why you had to sell our playground?" David dropped to his knees beside me, pulling both children into a hug. "No, buddy, we're not poor, and we didn't sell your playground. Grandma made a very big mistake." "Can we get it back?" Sophie asked, looking between us with hope that broke my heart. I was about to answer when Mrs. Chen, our neighbor from 3 houses down, appeared at our back fence. Helen Chen was 75 years old, retired from 30 years of teaching elementary school, and had the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing in our quiet neighborhood. "Emily, dear," she called out, her voice carefully neutral but her expression troubled. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" I kissed Sophie's forehead and stood up, walking over to the fence where Mrs. Chen waited. David stayed with the children, his voice low as he tried to explain something that made no sense to any of us. "I saw everything yesterday," Mrs. Chen said without preamble, her fingers gripping the fence post. "I was watering my roses when the truck arrived. Your mother-in-law directed them to dismantle the entire playground. The men seemed surprised. They kept asking if she was sure, if she had permission. She showed them some kind of paperwork. My blood went cold." "Paperwork?" "She told them she was acting as your agent while you were out of town, that you'd hired them to remove the equipment for resale." Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. "Emily, I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I know the difference between a legitimate removal and something that doesn't feel right. Did you get the name of the company?" Mrs. Chen reached into her gardening apron and pulled out a small piece of paper. "Parker's Playground Solutions." I wrote down their truck number too, just in case. The owner seemed professional, but he looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. He kept asking Linda to confirm the details. I took the paper with hands that shook slightly. Parker's Playground Solutions. I remembered the name from when we'd first purchased the equipment. Ryan Parker had personally overseen the installation, had spent extra time making sure everything was perfectly safe for Jake and Sophie. "There's something else," Mrs. Chen continued, lowering her voice. "I happened to run into Linda at Schnucks this morning. She was quite chatty about their new home theater system, bragging about the 75-inch television they'd just purchased. She mentioned selling some old outdoor furniture to help fund it." Old outdoor furniture. That $4,000 custom playground was old outdoor furniture to Linda Martinez. "Mrs. Chen," I said carefully, "did she say anything else?" The older woman's expression grew even more serious. "She mentioned that she was glad they'd finally gotten rid of that liability in your backyard, said it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt and sued the whole family." Liability. The word hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I remembered something I'd completely forgotten in the shock of discovering the missing playground. 3 weeks ago, Mike Thompson from Premium Safety Inspections had come to evaluate our playground equipment for our homeowner's insurance. The inspection had been routine, required after Mrs. Patterson, 2 streets over, had filed a claim when her grandson fell from her old swing set. I'd filed the safety report in my home office without really reading it, focused on other things, assuming everything was fine since the playground was relatively new and professionally installed. But now, with Mrs. Chen's words echoing in my mind, I realized I needed to find that report immediately. "Thank you for telling me this," I said to Mrs. Chen. "And for getting the truck information." She patted my hand through the fence. "Emily, dear, I've watched you and David raise those children with such love and care. What Linda did yesterday, that wasn't right. If you need a witness to what I saw, you just let me know." I walked back to where David was sitting on our back steps with Jake and Sophie. The children had calmed down somewhat, but I could see the confusion and hurt still clouding their faces. This kind of betrayal from trusted adults would leave marks that went far deeper than any physical injury. "I need to go inside and make some phone calls," I told David quietly. "Can you keep the kids occupied for a while?" He nodded, understanding from my tone that whatever I was planning, it was serious. "Hey guys," he said to Jake and Sophie, "want to help Daddy plan a new playground? One that's even better than the old one?" As their faces lit up with tentative excitement, I slipped into the house and headed straight for my home office. The filing cabinet in the corner held all our important documents, organized by category in the way that had driven my more casual husband crazy for years but was about to prove invaluable. I found the safety inspection report in the folder labeled Home Insurance, a thick packet I'd barely glanced at when it arrived. Mike Thompson's letterhead was professional and clean, the Premium Safety Inspections logo prominently displayed. But as I began to read the actual report, my hands started to shake. "Critical safety violations identified," the header read in bold red letters. What followed was a detailed list of problems with our playground equipment that made my stomach drop with each line. Loose bolts in the climbing wall. Splintered wood on the fort's ladder. Most damaging of all, a hairline crack in one of the main support beams that Mike had classified as immediate structural concern requiring professional repair or complete replacement within 30 days. The report was dated 3 weeks ago. The 30-day deadline was next Tuesday. But the most important part was at the bottom of the report, in a section titled Legal Liability Notice. Mike had written in clear, precise language that any playground equipment with these violations represented a significant liability risk to property owners. He'd specifically noted that the structural damage to the support beam created, quote, immediate danger of catastrophic failure, resulting in serious injury or death. And at the very bottom, in language that made my blood run cold, this equipment should not be used by children until all violations are corrected. Property owners who allow continued use of this equipment after receiving this report may be held criminally liable for any resulting injuries. I sat back in my office chair, the full implications hitting me like a freight train. Linda had sold playground equipment that was not only unsafe but potentially deadly. Whoever had bought it, wherever it was now installed, children could be seriously injured or killed because of structural problems that Linda knew nothing about. But here was the beautiful, terrible irony. She'd justified the sale by calling the playground a liability, when her action of selling it had created a liability that could destroy not just our family, but the family of whoever had unknowingly purchased defective equipment. I reached for my phone and dialed Parker's Playground Solutions. Ryan Parker answered on the second ring, his voice professional but wary. "Mrs. Martinez," he said after I identified myself. "I have to say, I was surprised by yesterday's removal request. When we installed that playground 2 years ago, you and your husband seemed so excited about it." "Mr. Parker," I said carefully, "I need you to know that my husband and I did not authorize that removal. My mother-in-law acted without our knowledge or permission while we were out of town." There was a long pause. "Are you saying the equipment was removed under false pretenses?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. But more importantly, I need to know where that equipment is now, because I have information about its condition that the buyers need to know immediately." I explained about the safety inspection report, reading him the critical violations word for word. With each item I listed, Ryan's responses grew more alarmed. "Mrs. Martinez," he said finally, his voice tight with concern, "we need to locate that equipment immediately. If what you're telling me is accurate, we could be looking at a..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catastrophic liability situation. Where is it now? The buyers paid cash and arranged their own transportation for installation. Your mother-in-law provided them with your contact information, but they said they had their own installation crew and didn't need our services. He paused. Which should have been a red flag, honestly. Professional installation comes with insurance and safety guarantees. My heart sank. So you don't know where it went? I have the buyer's name and phone number from the payment receipt. Let me pull that file. I heard papers rustling. The buyer was listed as James Morrison, paid $3,500 in cash. $3,500. Linda had sold our $4,000 playground for $3,500, pocketing our money to fund her home theater while selling potentially lethal equipment to an unsuspecting family. "Mr. Parker, I need you to contact Mr. Morrison immediately and inform him about the safety violations. This equipment cannot be used by children." "I'll call him right now," Ryan assured me. "Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that if we had known about these safety issues, we never would have facilitated this removal. Our company's reputation depends on child safety." After hanging up with Ryan, I sat in my office chair, staring at the safety report spread across my desk. Linda thought she'd been clever, eliminating what she saw as a liability while funding her home theater renovation. She had no idea that her actions had created a liability that could result in criminal charges, massive lawsuits, and the destruction of multiple families. But more than that, she'd hurt Jake and Sophie in a way that went beyond the loss of their playground. She'd made them feel abandoned by their own parents, convinced them that their happiness was less important than adult priorities. That betrayal of trust was something that might take years to heal. I heard David's voice outside, still trying to comfort our children, still trying to make sense of his mother's inexplicable cruelty. In a few minutes, I would have to tell him what I'd discovered. Watch his face as he realized the full scope of what his mother had done. But first, I had one more phone call to make. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the Oakville Police Department. Sarah and I had worked together on a case involving animal abuse at the vet clinic where I worked. She was thorough, professional, and had a particular intolerance for people who put children at risk. "Detective Rodriguez," she answered on the first ring. "Sarah, this is Emily Martinez. I need to report a theft, but it's complicated, and it involves potential child endangerment." I could hear her shifting into professional mode. "Emily, tell me what happened." I explained everything: the missing playground, Linda's note, the safety inspection report, the cash sale to unsuspecting buyers. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that told me she understood the seriousness of what I was describing. "Emily," she said when I finished, "what your mother-in-law did constitutes theft, fraud, and potentially reckless endangerment. If that equipment fails and a child is injured, she could face criminal charges. The buyers could also file civil suits against your family. What should I do? First, don't touch anything related to this sale. Any paperwork, any communication with the buyers, anything. This is evidence now. Second, I'm going to need copies of that safety inspection report, your mother-in-law's note, and any other documentation you have. Third, we need to make sure that playground equipment is secured immediately before someone gets hurt. Ryan Parker is calling the buyers now to warn them." "Good. But, Emily, I need to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Filing charges against family members is never easy, but if we don't stop this now, someone could die." I thought about Jake's serious little face, asking if we were poor, about Sophie crying because she thought we'd thrown away her fort. I thought about some other little girl or boy climbing on equipment with a cracked support beam, trusting adults to keep them safe. "I'm prepared," I said. "What do I need to do?" After I hung up with Detective Rodriguez, I sat quietly in my office for a moment, gathering my strength for what came next. Outside, I could hear David explaining to the children that sometimes adults make mistakes, that we would fix this somehow. His voice carried the weight of someone trying to hold his family together while his world shifted beneath his feet. I walked back outside with the safety inspection report in my hand. David looked up from where he sat with Jake and Sophie on the back steps, his expression questioning. "Kids," I said gently, "I need to talk to Daddy alone for a few minutes. Can you go inside and start thinking about what kind of new playground you'd like? Maybe draw some pictures of your ideas?" After they'd gone inside, chattering excitedly about slides and swings and maybe even a zip line, I sat down beside David and handed him the safety report. "What's this?" he asked, taking the papers. "The safety inspection report that came 3 weeks ago. The one I filed without really reading." I watched his face as he scanned the critical violations, saw the color drain from his cheeks as he reached the liability section. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Emily, this equipment was dangerous. If Jake or Sophie had been hurt." "But they weren't," I said quickly. "And now we know why Linda was so concerned about liability. She must have seen this report somehow." David's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. She mentioned liability to Mrs. Chen this morning. She justified the sale by saying it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt and sued the family. David, she knew about the safety violations. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She knew the equipment was dangerous, and she sold it anyway. She sold defective playground equipment to another family with children. I've already called Ryan Parker and Detective Rodriguez. We have to find that equipment before someone gets hurt." David stood up abruptly, the safety report clutched in his hands. "I'm going over there. I'm going to confront my parents right now." "David, wait." I caught his arm. Sarah Rodriguez said not to do anything that might interfere with the investigation. Let the police handle this. But I could see the fury building in his eyes, 10 years of accumulated frustration, with his mother's controlling behavior finally reaching a breaking point. "Emily, she stole from our children and then sold them equipment that could have killed them. She traumatized Jake and Sophie, made them think we abandoned them. And now she's put other children at risk. I can't just sit here and do nothing. Before I could stop him, David was striding across our backyard toward the gate that led to the street. I had no choice but to follow, my heart pounding as I anticipated the confrontation that was about to explode our family apart. But as we reached the sidewalk, Ryan Parker's truck pulled up in front of our house. He got out quickly, his expression grim, and jogged over to where we stood. "Mrs. Martinez, we have a problem," he said without preamble. I reached James Morrison, the buyer. "The playground equipment has already been installed at his house. Did you tell him about the safety violations?" I tried to, but Morrison claims he never bought any playground equipment. Says he's never heard of Linda Martinez or Parker's Playground Solutions. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "Mrs. Martinez, I think your mother-in-law sold that equipment using false buyer information." The implications hit me immediately. "She gave you fake buyer information so you couldn't trace where the equipment went." "It gets worse," Ryan continued. "I decided to drive by the address Morrison gave me, just to be sure. Mrs. Martinez, that playground is installed in the backyard of 1847 Oak Street. There are children playing on it right now." David went white. "Children are using it? With those safety violations? I couldn't legally enter the property to stop them, but I could see through the fence. 2 little kids, probably around the same age as yours, climbing all over that equipment. The parents have no idea what they're dealing with." I felt sick. Somewhere in Oakville, children were playing on equipment that could collapse at any moment, and their parents had no idea of the danger because Linda had covered her tracks with false information. "We need to get over there immediately," I said, but Ryan shook his head. I tried knocking on the door, but no one answered. "The children are in the backyard, unsupervised, while their parents are apparently inside. Mrs. Martinez, we need to call the police right now. This is beyond a family dispute. This is an immediate threat to child safety." As if summoned by his words, Detective Rodriguez's unmarked car turned onto Maple Drive. I waved her over, and she parked behind Ryan's truck, getting out with the purposeful stride of someone who had news. "Emily," she said, nodding to David and Ryan, "I've been making some calls about your situation. It turns out this isn't the first time Linda Martinez has been involved in questionable property transactions." "What do you mean?" "Last year, she sold a neighbor's lawnmower while they were on vacation, claimed it was cluttering up the neighborhood. The family chose not to press charges, but it's all documented. And 6 months ago, she donated items from another neighbor's garage sale to charity without permission, saying the sale was lowering property values." David stared at her in disbelief. "I never knew about any of this. Your mother has a pattern of taking other people's property when she decides it doesn't meet her standards. But this playground situation is different because of the safety violations and the false buyer information." Detective Rodriguez looked at Ryan. "Mr. Parker, you said children are currently using this equipment?" "Yes, ma'am. And based on the safety report Mrs. Martinez showed me, that equipment represents an immediate danger." "Then we're treating this as an emergency situation." Rodriguez was already reaching for her radio. "I'm dispatching officers to 1847 Oak Street immediately to secure the playground and evacuate any children. Mr. Parker, I'll need you to meet them there to verify the equipment and explain the safety concerns." As Ryan hurried back to his truck, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. We were stopping children from being hurt, but we were also about to shatter another family's sense of security, just as ours had been shattered. "What happens next?" David asked Detective Rodriguez. "Next, we pay a visit to your parents. I'll need to interview them about the sale, examine any paperwork they have, and determine what charges to file." She looked at both of us seriously. "Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Family theft cases often are. I thought about Jake and Sophie inside our house, drawing pictures of playground equipment they might never see again because of their grandmother's actions. I thought about children I'd never met, playing on dangerous equipment because Linda was more concerned with her home theater than human safety." "We're ready," I said. The walk to Bob and Linda's house felt like the longest 400 yards of my life. Detective Rodriguez had asked us to accompany her to help with identification and family dynamics, warning us to let her handle all the questioning. David walked beside me in silence, his face set in lines I'd never seen before. As we approached 1251 Maple Drive, I could see the glow of a large television through the living room windows. Linda's dream home theater was apparently already in use. The irony was suffocating. She was enjoying her new entertainment system, purchased with money from selling our children's playground, while somewhere across town other children were at risk because of her deception. Detective Rodriguez rang the doorbell with the firm official knock of law enforcement. Through the glass panels beside the door, I could see Bob approaching, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to concern as he recognized the three of us standing on his front porch. David? Emily? What's going on? Bob opened the door, his eyes moving from our faces to Detective Rodriguez's badge. Is everything all right? Mr. Martinez, I'm Detective Rodriguez with the Oakville Police Department. I need to speak with you and your wife about playground equipment that was removed from your son's property yesterday. Bob's face went pale. Linda handled that. She said David and Emily asked her to take care of it while they were out of town. May we come in, sir? I could hear Linda's voice from the living room as we entered, the sound of her new surround system clearly audible. Bob, who's at the door? If it's Mrs. Chen complaining about the volume again, tell her some people actually enjoy nice things. When Linda appeared in the entryway and saw our group, her expression went through a rapid series of changes. Surprise at seeing us, confusion at Detective Rodriguez's presence, and then something that looked like calculation as she tried to assess how much trouble she might be in. Emily, David, what's wrong? You look upset. Her voice carried that false sweetness she always used when she knew she'd overstepped but hoped to charm her way out of consequences. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Rodriguez said formally, I understand you arranged for the removal and sale of playground equipment from your son's property yesterday while they were out of town. Well, yes, but they asked me to handle it. Emily called me and said they needed the space cleared for a landscaping project. Linda's voice grew more confident as she settled into her lie. I was just helping family. The blatant dishonesty hit me like a slap. Not only had she stolen from us and endangered children, but she was going to lie to a police officer about it. Mom, David said quietly, Emily and I never asked you to sell our playground equipment. Of course you did, sweetheart. You probably just forgot in all the excitement of your romantic getaway. Linda's tone was patronizing, the same voice she'd used when Jake tried to tell her she was wrong about the playground sale. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a notebook. Mrs. Martinez, I'd like to see any documentation you have related to this sale. Receipts, communication with buyers, anything that supports your claim that you were acting on your son's behalf. For the first time, Linda looked genuinely nervous. I don't keep receipts for family favors, Detective. This is just a misunderstanding between relatives. The playground equipment you sold contained serious safety violations, I said, unable to stay quiet any longer. There was a cracked support beam that could have caused the entire structure to collapse. Linda's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. Well, that just proves I did the right thing by getting rid of it. Emily, you should be thanking me for preventing your children from getting hurt. Except you didn't prevent anything, Detective Rodriguez interjected. You sold potentially dangerous equipment to another family. Children are currently using that playground, unaware of the safety risks. The color drained from Linda's face. I didn't know about any safety problems. I was just trying to help with the landscaping project. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Rodriguez continued, the buyers you provided information for don't exist. James Morrison claims he never purchased playground equipment. The equipment is currently installed at a different address entirely. Bob had been standing quietly through this exchange, but now he stepped forward, his expression troubled. Linda, what is Detective Rodriguez talking about? What buyers? There must be some confusion. The nice young man who bought the equipment said his name was James Morrison. But you have no receipt, no contact information, and the address you provided doesn't match where the equipment is actually installed, Detective Rodriguez said calmly. Mrs. Martinez, providing false information to facilitate a sale suggests this wasn't a simple family favor. I could see Linda's mind working frantically, trying to find a way out of the corner she'd painted herself into. But there was nowhere to go. The evidence was too clear, the lies too obvious. What I don't understand, Bob said slowly, is why you sold their playground at all, Linda. David and Emily never mentioned any landscaping project to me because there wasn't one, David said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Mom sold our children's playground to help pay for your new home theater system. Bob's face went white as he looked from David to the living room where the massive television glowed. Linda, please tell me that's not true. Bob, you don't understand. That playground was an eyesore in such a beautiful neighborhood. Property values, appearances, these things matter. And the children barely used it anyway. The children barely used it? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Linda, Jake, and Sophie played on that playground every single day. It was their favorite place in the world. They'll get over it. Children are resilient. Linda's tone suggested she thought this conversation was getting unnecessarily dramatic. Besides, we got them a nice gift with some of the money, a new educational tablet to share. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. She'd stolen their playground, traumatized them by making them think their parents had abandoned their happiness, and thought a single tablet would make up for what she'd destroyed. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Rodriguez said, I need you to understand something. The playground equipment you sold has been identified as having critical safety violations. The current property owners need to be contacted immediately so those children can be removed from danger. Where exactly is this equipment now? Linda looked around the room frantically, as if searching for support that wasn't coming. Bob stood with his arms crossed, his expression growing more horrified by the minute. David stared at his mother with a mixture of anger and heartbreak that was painful to witness. I don't know exactly where it went, Linda finally admitted. The buyer said they'd handle the installation themselves. So you sold $4,000 worth of potentially lethal playground equipment to strangers, provided false contact information, took their cash, and never verified where it was going or who might be hurt by it. Detective Rodriguez's voice remained professionally neutral, but I could hear the disgust underneath. It wasn't $4,000, Linda protested. They only paid $3,500, and that's what I told David and Emily it was worth. Because you pocketed our money, David said flatly. You stole from your own grandchildren and then lied about what you received for it. Linda's composure finally cracked. I was trying to help this family. That playground was a liability waiting to happen, and frankly, Emily, your children are old enough that they should be developing more sophisticated interests anyway. Jake is 8. He should be reading classic literature, not swinging like some common playground child. The room fell silent. Even Detective Rodriguez seemed taken aback by the sheer audacity of Linda's statement. More sophisticated interests? I repeated slowly. Linda, they're 6 and 8 years old. They're supposed to be playing like common playground children. Bob, Linda turned to her husband desperately. You understand. We've worked so hard to maintain certain standards in this neighborhood. That playground equipment was cheap-looking, it attracted the wrong sort of children from other streets, and it was becoming a gathering place for teenagers in the evenings. Bob shook his head slowly. Linda, I never said any of those things. I thought the playground was lovely. I enjoyed watching Jake and Sophie play on it from our kitchen window. You're all overreacting, Linda said, her voice rising with hysteria. This is just another example of Emily trying to make me look bad, because she's never forgiven me for suggesting that David could have married better. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Detective Rodriguez looked uncomfortable with the level of family dysfunction she was witnessing. That's enough, David said quietly, but his voice carried a finality that made everyone stop talking. Mom, you stole from us. You endangered children. You traumatized Jake and Sophie. And now you're standing here acting like we're the ones with the problem. David, sweetheart, you're being dramatic. Family helps family. That's what I was doing. No, he said firmly. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't steal. And family doesn't put children in danger to fund their entertainment systems. Detective Rodriguez cleared her throat. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to come with me to the station to answer some formal questions about this sale. Mr. Martinez, you're welcome to accompany your wife or arrange for an attorney. An attorney? Linda's voice went shrill. This is ridiculous. I was helping family. Mrs. Martinez, you've admitted to removing property from someone else's residence without permission, selling that property using false buyer information and keeping the proceeds. That constitutes theft and fraud. The fact that the equipment was safety compromised and you failed to disclose that to buyers could result in additional charges. As Detective Rodriguez read Linda her rights, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the cost was the destruction of family relationships that could never be fully repaired. Bob walked over to David and me, his face etched with shame and sorrow. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I had no idea Linda had done any of this. The home theater, the missing playground. I thought you'd really asked her to handle the sale." "Dad, we would never sell the kids' playground without talking to you," David said, embracing his father. "This isn't your fault, but it is my responsibility to make it right," Bob replied firmly. "Whatever this costs, replacing the playground, dealing with the legal issues, making sure those other children are safe, I'll handle it. And Linda will face the consequences of her actions." As Linda was escorted to Detective Rodriguez's car, she called back to us desperately. "David, you can't let them arrest your own mother over a simple misunderstanding. Think about what this will do to our family." David walked to the front door and looked at his mother sitting in the back of the police car. "Mom, you already destroyed our family. I'm just making sure you don't destroy anyone else's." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and police procedures. Detective Rodriguez contacted the family at 1847 Oak Street, who immediately removed their children from the dangerous playground and expressed gratitude that we'd prevented a potential tragedy. Ryan Parker arranged for the safe removal and disposal of the compromised equipment, refusing to charge us for a situation that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. As evening approached, David and I sat on our back steps with Jake and Sophie, watching them draw elaborate playground designs on large sheets of paper. They'd accepted our explanation that Grandma had made a mistake and that we'd build something even better together as a family. "Daddy," Sophie said, holding up a drawing of what appeared to be a playground castle, "can our new playground have a reading nook where I can have tea parties with my books?" "Absolutely, sweetheart," David replied, ruffling her hair. "What about you, Jake? What do you want in our new playground?" "A place where friends can come play too," Jake said seriously, "but maybe a fence so no one can take it away while we're gone." The innocent wisdom of children. Jake had already figured out that security and protection were important, even if he didn't fully understand why. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Emily, dear, I saw Linda being taken away in a police car. If you need anything, watching the children, bringing dinner, anything at all, please let me know. The whole neighborhood is behind you." As I showed David the message, more texts began arriving from neighbors, friends, and even some of David's relatives who had heard about Linda's arrest through the family grapevine. The support was overwhelming and touching, a reminder that not all family is defined by blood, and not all blood relations deserve the title of family. Bob appeared at our back gate as the sun was setting, his face haggard but determined. "David, Emily, could I speak with you for a moment?" We sent the kids inside to wash up for dinner and joined Bob at the gate. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "Linda's been charged with theft, fraud, and reckless endangerment," he said without preamble. "She's been released on bail, but she's not allowed to contact you or come near your property. Her sister picked her up from the station." "Dad, I'm sorry this happened," David said. "I know how much you love her." "I do love her," Bob replied sadly. "But love doesn't excuse what she did. And it doesn't mean I have to enable her behavior anymore." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a cashier's check for $6,000. It should cover replacement playground equipment and any other costs from this situation." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Bob interrupted firmly. "My wife stole from my grandchildren and put other children in danger. I may not be able to undo what she did, but I can take responsibility for making it right." I accepted the envelope, understanding that Bob needed to do this for his own peace of mind as much as for our financial recovery. "There's something else," Bob continued. "I've decided to file for divorce. This incident was the final straw, but honestly, Linda's behavior has been escalating for years. I can't continue to live with someone who thinks stealing from family is acceptable." David looked shocked. "Dad, are you sure? You've been married 27 years. And for too many of those years, I've been making excuses for behavior that I should have stopped long ago. If I'd addressed Linda's pattern of taking other people's property when it first started, maybe it never would have escalated to this point. As Bob walked back to his house, I realized that Linda's actions had consequences she'd never anticipated. In trying to control our family by stealing our children's playground, she'd lost her husband, her son, her grandchildren, and her freedom. Her obsession with appearances and social status had cost her everything that actually mattered. 3 months later, I stood in our backyard watching Jake and Sophie christen their new playground with a group of neighborhood children. This playground was bigger and better than the original, with features we never could have afforded before Bob's generous compensation. But more importantly, it was surrounded by a community of friends and neighbors who had rallied around us during our crisis. Linda had been sentenced to 6 months in jail and 2 years of probation, plus restitution to cover all costs related to her theft and fraud. The judge had been particularly harsh about the child endangerment aspect, noting that Linda's actions could have resulted in serious injury or death. Bob had indeed filed for divorce and was already looking much happier and younger without Linda's constant criticism and control. He'd become a regular fixture at family dinners and playground parties, finally free to enjoy his grandchildren without Linda's disapproving commentary. Mrs. Chen waved from her garden as she tended her roses, the unofficial neighborhood watch captain who had helped solve the mystery of the missing playground. Ryan Parker had become a family friend, stopping by periodically to check on the new equipment, and usually staying for dinner. Most importantly, Jake and Sophie had recovered from the trauma of thinking their parents had abandoned their happiness. They understood now that some adults make very bad choices, but that they were surrounded by people who would always protect and love them. As I watched my children play with their friends on equipment that was not only safe but surrounded by a community that would never let anyone take it away, I realized that Linda's attempt to destroy our family had actually made us stronger. She'd tried to tear down what we'd built, but instead had given us the opportunity to build something even better. Sometimes the people who try hardest to destroy your happiness end up being the ones who push you to create the life you actually deserve. The real test of our family's resilience came 6 weeks after Linda's arrest, when David received a call from his cousin Michelle in Cincinnati. Linda had been staying with her sister but was now demanding that Michelle arrange a reconciliation meeting with David and the children. "She keeps saying that everyone has blown this playground thing way out of proportion," Michelle explained apologetically over speakerphone, while David and I sat at our kitchen table. "Aunt Linda claims she was just trying to help upgrade your yard, and that Emily has poisoned everyone against her." I felt that familiar surge of anger at Linda's continued refusal to accept responsibility, but David's response surprised me with its calm firmness. "Michelle, Mom endangered children and stole from our family. Until she accepts responsibility for what she did, and gets professional help for why she thought any of that was acceptable, there won't be any meetings." "She's threatening to contest the divorce and fight for visitation rights with Jake and Sophie," Michelle warned. "Uncle Bob is worried she might try to cause more problems." After hanging up, David and I sat quietly for a moment, processing this new challenge. Just when we thought we were moving forward, Linda was preparing to drag us back into her chaos. "She can't seriously think she has a case for visitation after what she did," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew that Linda's capacity for self-deception was limitless. David reached across the table and took my hand. "Em, whatever she tries to do, we'll handle it together. We have documentation, witnesses, and a criminal conviction. No judge is going to award unsupervised visitation to someone who stole from children and endangered others." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Detective Rodriguez appeared at our door with a woman I didn't recognize, a professional-looking blonde in her 40s carrying a briefcase. "Emily, David, this is Assistant District Attorney Karen Walsh," Detective Rodriguez said. "She's prosecuting Linda's case, and she has some information you need to hear." We invited them into our living room, where Karen Walsh opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been investigating your mother-in-law's pattern of behavior," she said without preamble, "and what we've discovered goes far beyond the playground incident." Karen spread several documents across our coffee table, each one detailing incidents I'd never heard about. Credit card fraud involving charges to neighbors' accounts for landscaping services they never requested. forged signatures on homeowners association documents that gave Linda authority to make decisions about other people's property. Even theft from local charity drives where Linda had volunteered. Your case was the catalyst that made other victims come forward, Karen explained. Linda Martinez has been operating like this for years, but most people didn't report it because they were embarrassed or thought it was too petty to involve police. David stared at the documents in shock. I had no idea any of this was happening. Your mother is very good at compartmentalizing her victims, Detective Rodriguez added. She never targeted the same type of person twice, and she always had explanations that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. Karen leaned forward, her expression serious. The reason I'm here is that Linda's attorney has approached us about a plea bargain. She wants to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding trial on the other incidents. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means she would serve less jail time, but would have to pay full restitution to all victims and undergo mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment. The downside is that she'd be out of jail sooner and potentially able to cause more problems for your family. David and I exchanged glances. The idea of Linda being released early was unsettling, but the thought of multiple trials dragging out for months was equally unappealing. What do you recommend? David asked. Honestly, I think the plea deal serves justice better than a trial would, Karen replied. Linda will have to admit guilt to everything, compensate everyone she hurt, and get the psychological help she clearly needs. A trial might result in a longer sentence, but it would also put you and your children through months of stress and media attention. Media attention? Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. The story has already been picked up by several news outlets as an example of toxic family behavior. If this goes to trial, it becomes a much bigger circus. After they left, David and I spent hours discussing our options. The children were at school, giving us the space to process this new complexity without worrying about their reactions. Part of me wants her to face the full consequences, David admitted as we walked through our backyard. But another part of me just wants this to be over, so we can focus on rebuilding. What does Bob think? Dad supports whatever decision we make. I think he's just exhausted from dealing with all of this. David stopped beside the space where our new playground would soon be installed. I keep thinking about what kind of example we want to set for Jake and Sophie. Do we teach them that justice means maximum punishment? Or that sometimes justice means finding a solution that helps everyone heal? That evening, we called a family meeting with just the four of us. Jake and Sophie had been remarkably resilient throughout this ordeal, but we wanted to make sure they understood what was happening and had input on decisions that affected them. Kids, we need to talk about Grandma Linda and what happens next, I began carefully. Sophie, now 7 and increasingly thoughtful about adult complexities, spoke first. Is she still in trouble for taking our playground? Yes, sweetheart, she is. But now we have to decide how much trouble she should be in. Jake frowned, his 8-year-old sense of fairness engaged. She should say sorry and give back what she took, and promise never to do it again. That's exactly what the lawyers are suggesting, David said, smiling at his son's wisdom. Grandma would have to admit she was wrong, pay for a new playground, and get help to make sure she doesn't hurt anyone else. But she would come home sooner than if she stayed in jail for a long time, I added. Sophie considered this seriously. Will she try to take our new playground too? No, baby. There are rules now that say she can't come near our house or bother our family. Then I think Jake is right, Sophie decided. She should say sorry and fix what she broke and learn how to be nice. Out of the mouths of babes. Our children, who had been the primary victims of Linda's actions, were advocating for a solution focused on accountability and healing rather than pure punishment. The next week, we met with Karen Walsh to inform her of our decision to support the plea agreement. Linda would plead guilty to all charges, serve 90 days in jail followed by 2 years of probation, pay full restitution to all victims, and undergo court-mandated psychological evaluation and treatment. There's one more thing, Karen added as we concluded our meeting. As part of the plea agreement, Linda has agreed to record a statement acknowledging her actions and apologizing to all victims. You can choose whether or not to receive a copy. David and I looked at each other questioningly. Did we want to hear Linda's apology, knowing it was probably motivated more by legal strategy than genuine remorse? We'll take the statement, I decided. If she's truly accepting responsibility, we should hear it. And if she's not, we need to know that too. 2 weeks later, a package arrived containing a DVD labeled Statement of Linda Martinez. David and I waited until Jake and Sophie were at their after-school program before playing it. Linda appeared on screen in an orange jail uniform, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen her. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no makeup. For the first time in the years I'd known her, she looked genuinely humbled. My name is Linda Martinez, and I want to acknowledge the harm I've caused to my family and my community, she began, reading from a prepared statement. I stole playground equipment from my son David and daughter-in-law Emily while they trusted me to watch their children. I sold this equipment to strangers without disclosing safety violations that could have seriously injured or killed children. She paused, and for a moment I thought I saw genuine emotion cross her face. I convinced myself that I was helping my family by making decisions I thought were best for them. I was wrong. I had no right to take their property, no right to endanger children, and no right to traumatize my grandchildren by making them think their parents had abandoned them. Linda looked directly into the camera, and I could see tears in her eyes. David, Emily, Jake, and Sophie, I am deeply sorry for the pain I've caused you. I understand that my actions have destroyed your trust in me, and I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that someday you might believe that I truly regret what I did, and that I'm committed to getting the help I need to never hurt anyone like this again. The video continued with Linda acknowledging her other victims and taking responsibility for years of boundary violations and theft. By the end, I found myself crying not just for our family's pain but for the broken woman on screen who had destroyed her own life through her need to control everyone around her. Do you think she means it? David asked quietly when the video ended. I think she means it right now, I replied carefully. Whether she'll still mean it 6 months from now when she's out of jail and back in the real world, that's the real question. The day Linda was released from jail, Bob came over for dinner, as had become his custom since the divorce proceedings began. He looked both relieved and apprehensive as he helped Jake with his homework at our kitchen table. She's staying with her sister in Cincinnati for now, he told us quietly while the children worked on their math problems. The court-ordered therapist says she needs to complete at least 6 months of intensive treatment before she can even consider moving back to Ohio. How are you doing with all of this, Dad? David asked, studying his father's face. Bob sighed deeply. Honestly, I feel like I'm waking up from a 27-year nightmare. I didn't realize how much energy I was spending making excuses for Linda's behavior until I stopped doing it. That weekend, our new playground was finally installed. Ryan Parker supervised the construction personally, incorporating every safety feature available and adding several custom elements that Jake and Sophie had requested. The reading nook for Sophie was tucked into a shaded corner of the fort, while Jake's friend-friendly design included multiple climbing routes and places for group games. Mrs. Chen hosted a neighborhood celebration for the playground's completion, organizing a potluck dinner in our backyard. Watching our children play with friends while adults chatted and laughed around picnic tables, I felt a profound sense of healing and community that Linda's actions had inadvertently created. You know what's funny? David said, standing beside me as we watched Jake teach younger children how to safely use the climbing wall. If Mom hadn't stolen our playground, we never would have built something this amazing. Are you saying you're grateful she did it? No, definitely not. But I'm grateful for what we learned about ourselves and our community through handling it. We discovered we're stronger than we thought, and we're surrounded by people who care about us. Eddie Martinez, the owner of the hardware store, approached us with a beer in hand and a thoughtful expression. Emily, David, I've been thinking about what happened with Linda and wondering if there might be a way to turn this experience into something positive for other families. What do you mean? Well, you handled a really difficult family situation with grace and strength. Have you considered that other people might benefit from hearing your story, not for entertainment but as a resource for families dealing with similar problems? I hadn't considered it, but Eddie's suggestion intrigued me. You think our story could help other people? I know it could. My sister in California has been dealing with in-laws who take liberties with her property and undermine her parenting. She's been making excuses for them for years because she doesn't want to cause family drama. Hearing about how you set boundaries and enforced consequences might give her the courage to protect her own family. David squeezed my hand. What would that look like? Maybe starting with writing about your experience for the community newsletter, Eddie suggested. Just sharing what you learned about setting boundaries with family members who overstep. The idea of turning our painful experience into a resource for others appealed to me. If our story could help even one family avoid the trauma we'd experienced, it would give meaning to everything we'd endured. 3 months later, my article, When Family Becomes the Problem, Setting Boundaries with Toxic Relatives, was published in the Oakville community newsletter. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails from people sharing their own stories of family members who stole, manipulated, or endangered others while hiding behind the excuse of family loyalty. One message particularly touched me. A woman named Sarah wrote that my article had given her the courage to report her brother-in-law for stealing tools from her husband's workshop. Like Linda, he had justified his actions as, quote, borrowing and helping, while making the victims feel guilty for objecting. Reading about how you protected your children while still maintaining your dignity gave me a roadmap for handling my own situation, Sarah wrote. My family thought I was being dramatic, but you helped me understand that setting boundaries isn't about being mean. It's about protecting the people you love. The newsletter article led to speaking invitations from local parenting groups and family counseling organizations. David and I began presenting workshops on identifying and addressing toxic family behavior, always emphasizing that cutting off family members should be a last resort, but that protecting children from harm should be the first priority. During one of these presentations, a woman in the audience asked a question that stopped me cold. What would you do if Linda wanted to have a relationship with your children again? If she completed her therapy and seemed genuinely changed? David and I looked at each other, realizing we'd been so focused on moving forward that we hadn't seriously considered this possibility. I think, I said carefully, that we would evaluate any future relationship based on her actions, not her words. Change has to be demonstrated over time, not just promised. And it would have to be on our terms, David added. Supervised visits, specific boundaries, immediate consequences, if those boundaries were violated. Our children's safety and emotional well-being would always come first. The question haunted me for days afterward. Was I prepared to forgive Linda if she truly changed? Did I want her to change? Or had I become comfortable with her absence from our lives? 6 months after Linda's release from jail, Bob brought us an unexpected message. Linda had completed her court-mandated therapy and wanted to write letters to Jake and Sophie, apologizing for her actions and asking for their forgiveness. The therapist says writing the letters is part of her healing process, Bob explained, but she wanted me to ask your permission first. Jake and Sophie, now 9 and 8, had thrived in the absence of Linda's criticism and manipulation. They were more confident, more willing to express their opinions, and more secure in their parents' love. The idea of Linda re-entering their lives, even through letters, felt like inviting chaos back into our peaceful world. What do you think, kids? David asked them directly. Would you want to receive letters from Grandma? Linda? Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. Would we have to write back if we didn't want to? Absolutely not, I assured her. Reading the letters would be your choice, and responding would be your choice. Jake nodded slowly. I think I want to see what she says, but I don't want to see her in person yet. We agreed to allow Linda to send letters, with the understanding that we would read them first and only share them with the children if they were appropriate. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later, written on simple white paper in Linda's careful handwriting. Dear Jake and Sophie, it began. I know I hurt you when I took away your playground, and I want you to know how sorry I am. I made a very bad choice, and I understand if you're angry with me. I'm working with a doctor to learn how to make better choices and be a better grandmother. I miss you both very much, and I hope that someday you might give me a chance to show you that I've learned how to be the grandmother you deserve. Love, Grandma Linda. The letter was simple, direct, and free of the manipulation and excuse-making that had characterized Linda's previous communications. When we showed it to Jake and Sophie, they read it quietly and then looked at each other with the silent communication that siblings share. "She sounds different," Sophie observed. "Yeah, but people can sound different in letters," Jake replied, with the skepticism of a child who had learned not to trust adult promises easily. "What do you want to do?" David asked. "Can we write back and ask her questions?" Sophie asked. "What kind of questions?" "Like, how do we know she won't take our new playground too? And why did she lie about us wanting to get rid of the old one?" I was amazed by my children's ability to cut through adult complexity and focus on the practical issues that mattered to them. They weren't asking for philosophical discussions about forgiveness or family bonds. They wanted concrete assurance that they would be safe. Over the following months, a careful correspondence developed between Linda and the children. Her letters were always reviewed by us first, and the children's responses were limited to specific questions about her behavior and intentions. Gradually, a picture emerged of someone genuinely working to understand and change the patterns that had led to her destructive actions. The real test came 8 months later when Linda asked Bob to arrange a supervised video call with the children. She had completed additional therapy, held down a part-time job in Cincinnati, and demonstrated consistent, respectful behavior toward our boundaries. "I understand if you're not ready," Bob said as he made the request, "but her therapist thinks it might be beneficial for everyone to see each other face-to-face, even virtually." We agreed to a 15-minute video call with David and me present, and the understanding that we could end it immediately if Linda said or did anything inappropriate. When Linda's face appeared on our computer screen, I barely recognized her. She looked older, certainly, but also calmer and more genuinely present than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the manic energy and constant criticism that had defined her personality. "Hi, Jake. Hi, Sophie," she said simply, her voice warm but careful. "You both look so grown up." "Hi, Grandma," Sophie replied politely, but without the enthusiasm she once showed. "Grandma Linda," Jake said, using the formal address that created distance while still acknowledging the relationship. "I want you both to know that I think about you every day," Linda continued. "And I want you to know that what I did with your playground was wrong. I should never have taken something that belonged to you, and I should never have made you think your parents didn't want you to be happy." "Why did you do it?" Sophie asked directly. Linda paused, clearly prepared for this question. "I thought I knew what was best for everyone, and I didn't ask what you wanted or what your parents wanted. I made decisions that weren't mine to make, because I was more worried about what other people thought than about what would make you happy." "Are you still worried about what other people think?" Jake asked. "Sometimes," Linda admitted, "but now I talk to my therapist about those feelings instead of acting on them. I've learned that my job as a grandmother is to support your parents and make you feel loved, not to make decisions for your family." The conversation continued for exactly 15 minutes, with Linda answering the children's questions honestly and directly. When it ended, Jake and Sophie seemed thoughtful but not distressed. "She does seem different," Sophie said after we'd closed the laptop. "But we should be careful," Jake added wisely. "People can seem different for a little while and then go back to being the same." A year later, Linda moved back to Ohio but chose to live in an apartment across town rather than returning to Maple Drive. She found a job at a local library and began attending weekly therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in family relationship repair. The children now exchanged monthly video calls with her and occasional supervised visits at neutral locations like parks or restaurants. Linda never pushed for more contact, never complained about the restrictions, and consistently demonstrated respect for our boundaries. During one of these visits, as we sat in Riverside Park watching Jake and Sophie play on a public playground, Linda turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Emily, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "For years I resented you because I thought you weren't good enough for David. But the truth is, I was threatened by you because you are everything I never learned how to be: confident, capable, and secure enough to put your children's needs ahead of your own ego." The admission surprised me with its vulnerability and insight. "I'm not perfect, Linda," I replied. "I make mistakes with the kids all the time. But you make mistakes because you're trying to do right by them, not because you're trying to control them. I never learned the difference until I lost everything and had to rebuild myself from scratch. Watching Linda slowly earn back small pieces of her relationship with our family has been like watching someone learn to walk again after a serious injury. Every interaction is careful, deliberate, and focused on proving that she can be trusted with the privilege of loving our children. The new playground still stands in our backyard, now weathered by 2 years of constant use and countless neighborhood gatherings. Mrs. Chen continues to tend her roses and keep watch over our street. Bob has become an integral part of our daily lives, the grandfather Jake and Sophie always deserve to have. Most importantly, our children have learned lessons about boundaries, forgiveness, and family that will serve them throughout their lives. They understand that love doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, that family members can lose the right to access your life through their actions, and that healing is possible but must be earned through consistent, trustworthy behavior over time. Sometimes when I watch Jake and Sophie playing with their friends on equipment that replaced what was stolen from them, I think about the unexpected gifts that came from Linda's devastating actions. We discovered reserves of strength we didn't know we possessed. We built a community of support that extends far beyond blood relations. We learned to prioritize our children's well-being over adult comfort and convenience. Linda's attempt to control our family by destroying something precious to our children ultimately taught us all, including Linda herself, what truly matters in family relationships. Trust must be earned. Boundaries must be respected. And sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting your children from people who claim to love them but consistently harm them. Our story continues to evolve, but the foundation remains solid. We are a family that faces challenges together, supports each other unconditionally, and never again takes for granted the simple joy of children playing safely in their own backyard. The crisis that would test everything we'd rebuilt came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 years after Linda's initial crime. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang with a call from an unknown Cincinnati number. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Cincinnati General Hospital. I'm calling about Linda Martinez. You're listed as her emergency contact." My blood went cold. Despite everything that had happened, the thought of Linda being seriously hurt or sick filled me with unexpected dread. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" "Mrs. Martinez, your mother-in-law was brought in last night after what appears to be a severe panic attack. She's physically stable, but she's been asking for her family. She seems to be experiencing some kind of psychological crisis." I sat down heavily on our bed, my mind racing. Linda had been doing so well in her therapy, maintaining steady progress and rebuilding relationships with the children. What could have triggered such a dramatic setback? "Doctor, can you tell me what happened? What caused the panic attack?" "I'm limited in what I can share due to privacy laws, but I can tell you that she was brought in by her landlord after neighbors reported screaming and sounds of destruction coming from her apartment. When paramedics arrived, they found her in a severely agitated state, claiming that someone was trying to steal from her." The irony was almost too bitter to comprehend. Linda, whose own theft had torn our family apart, was now terrorized by the fear of being robbed herself. David appeared in our bedroom doorway, having heard my end of the conversation. His face was already creased with concern and the familiar weight of family responsibility. "Em, what's happening?" I put the phone on speaker so he could hear Dr. Hendricks continue. "Mrs. Martinez, your mother-in-law is asking specifically for her son David and her grandchildren. She keeps saying she needs to make sure they're safe from the people who take things. I believe she's experiencing some kind of trauma response, but she's refusing to speak with our psychiatric staff until she sees her family." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from every difficult decision we'd faced over the past 2 years. "Doctor, we live in Ohio. It would take us several hours to get there, and we have young children who are in school. I understand this puts you in a difficult position. Your mother-in-law's sister has been here, but Linda becomes more agitated when she tries to comfort her. She specifically keeps asking for David and saying she needs to warn the children about something." After hanging up with Dr. Hendricks, David and I sat in our bedroom facing a decision that felt impossibly complicated. Linda had worked so hard to rebuild our trust, but she was also the person who had traumatized our children in the first place. Did we owe her our presence during a mental health crisis? Or did we owe it to Jake and Sophie to protect them from being pulled back into Linda's psychological turmoil? "I have to go," David said finally. "Whatever else has happened between us, she's still my mother, and she's clearly in crisis." "I know. But David, what about the kids? They're finally feeling secure and stable. What does it do to them to see Linda in a psychiatric emergency? Maybe they don't have to see her like this. Maybe I go alone, make sure she's getting the help she needs, and then we decide what to tell Jake and Sophie." The plan seemed reasonable until David called me from Cincinnati General Hospital 3 hours later. His voice was strained and exhausted when he spoke. It's worse than I thought. She's not just having a panic attack, she's exhibiting signs of a complete psychological break. She keeps insisting that there are people in her apartment, stealing her belongings and rearranging her furniture to make her think she's going crazy." "Are there actually people in her apartment?" "No, the landlord checked thoroughly. Nothing's been disturbed, nothing's missing. But Linda is absolutely convinced that someone is systematically taking small items and moving things, refused medication, and continued to demand that we bring Jake and Sophie to warn them about the danger she perceived." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, who had remained a steady presence in our lives since the playground incident, knocked on our door with an unusual request. "Emily, dear, I've been thinking about Linda's situation," she said, as we sat in my kitchen over coffee. "In my 40 years of teaching, I encountered several children who created elaborate fantasy scenarios when they felt powerless or guilty about something they'd done. You think Linda is creating fantasies? I think Linda is experiencing exactly what she put other people through, and her mind can't handle the reversal. She spent years taking things that didn't belong to her, convincing herself she had good reasons. Now she's terrified that others are doing the same to her." Mrs. Chen leaned forward with the intensity she'd once brought to challenging students. "What if instead of bringing Jake and Sophie to her, we brought evidence of their safety and happiness to her? Photos of them playing on the new playground, videos of them talking about feeling secure at home, proof that they're thriving despite what she did?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than exposing our children to Linda's psychological crisis, we could show Linda that her fears about their safety were unfounded, because we had created a secure environment for them. That weekend, we embarked on a project that felt like both healing and hope. Jake and Sophie enthusiastically helped create a photo album and video presentation showing their daily lives, their friends, their school activities, and especially their joy in playing on the playground that had replaced the one Linda stole. "Tell Grandma Linda that we're okay," Sophie said into the camera with the earnest sincerity of a child who understood the importance of her message. "Tell her we have lots of friends and we feel safe at home and nobody takes our toys without asking." Jake added his own message with the thoughtfulness that made him seem older than his 9 years. "Grandma Linda, I want you to know that even though you took our playground, we're not mad anymore. We have an even better one now, and you don't have to worry about us being safe because Mom and Dad take really good care of us." When David brought the photo album and video to Cincinnati the following Monday, Dr. Williams agreed to show them to Linda as part of her therapy session. The results were immediate and dramatic. Seeing concrete evidence that Jake and Sophie were safe and happy seemed to break through Linda's paranoid thinking. Dr. Williams reported in a phone call later that day. She watched the video 3 times, and each time she became calmer and more present. For the first time since she was admitted, she's agreed to take medication and participate in therapy. But Dr. Williams had more to tell us, and her tone grew more serious. "David, Emily, I need you to understand something about Linda's condition. This wasn't just a random psychological break. The paranoid thoughts, the fear of being robbed, the need to warn children about theft, these are all manifestations of profound guilt and self-hatred about her own actions. What does that mean for her recovery? It means that Linda has been carrying the weight of what she did to your family in ways she never acknowledged before. Her conscious mind spent 2 years working on recovery and making amends, but her unconscious mind has been torturing her with fears of experiencing what she put others through." Dr. Williams paused, and I could hear papers rustling as she consulted her notes. In some ways, this breakdown represents progress. Linda's psyche is finally processing the full impact of her actions. But it also means her recovery is going to be more complicated than we initially thought. She needs to work through not just the behavior patterns that led to the theft, but the deep psychological damage she did to herself by violating her own moral standards. The conversation left David and me with a complex mixture of emotions. We felt compassion for Linda's psychological suffering, while also recognizing that this suffering was the natural consequence of her own choices. We wanted her to heal, but we also couldn't allow her healing process to disrupt the stability we'd built for our children. 2 weeks later, Linda was discharged from Cincinnati General with a new treatment plan that included intensive therapy 3 times a week, medication for anxiety and depression, and participation in a support group for people recovering from compulsive stealing behaviors. Her first communication with us after the hospitalization was a handwritten letter that arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Unlike her previous correspondence, this letter wasn't addressed to Jake and Sophie. It was addressed to David and me. Dear David and Emily, it began in Linda's careful script. I want you to know that I understand now what I put you through when I stole from your family. For the past month, I have lived with the constant fear that strangers were taking my belongings and violating my home. The terror and helplessness I felt gave me just a small taste of what I inflicted on you and the children. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Linda's new understanding of the psychological impact of theft and violation. She wrote about the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being unsafe in her own space. Most importantly, she wrote about her realization that Jake and Sophie had experienced these same feelings when she took their playground. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. But I want you to know that I finally understand the magnitude of what I did. It wasn't just about playground equipment or money. I violated your family's sense of safety and security. I made your children feel powerless and betrayed by someone they trusted. I can never undo that damage, but I can promise that I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never cause such harm again. Reading Linda's letter felt like witnessing the birth of genuine empathy in someone who had spent decades focusing only on her own perspective. But it also raised new questions about what role, if any, she should play in our children's lives going forward. She sounds different, David said after we'd read the letter together twice. More aware of the real impact of what she did. But David, she sounded different before too, and then she had this psychological break. How do we know this awareness will stick? It was a fair question, and one that we couldn't answer without more time and evidence. Linda's mental health crisis had reminded us that recovery isn't linear, and that people can backslide in dramatic and unpredictable ways. The decision about how to proceed came, once again, from Jake and Sophie themselves. When we told them about Linda's hospitalization and her new understanding of the harm she'd caused, they listened with the careful attention they gave to all important family discussions. I think Grandma Linda needs to prove she's really better before we see her again, Jake said with the wisdom of a child who had learned not to trust adult promises easily. What kind of proof? I asked. Maybe she could go to school like we do, but school for grown-ups who need to learn how to be nice to people. And maybe she could help other people who made mistakes like hers. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Like community service, but for being mean to families. Their suggestion was remarkably sophisticated and reflected an understanding of accountability that went beyond simple punishment or forgiveness. They wanted Linda to demonstrate change through action and service to others, not just through words and promises. When we shared the children's suggestions with Dr. Williams, she was impressed by their insight. What Jake and Sophie are describing is exactly the kind of restorative justice approach that works best for people with Linda's behavioral patterns, she said during a phone consultation. They're instinctively understanding that true change requires not just stopping harmful behavior but actively contributing to healing the harm that was done. Dr. Williams recommended that Linda spend at least 6 months in intensive therapy and community service before any face-to-face contact with Jake and Sophie. During this time, she could continue writing letters and perhaps participate in family therapy sessions via video call, but only if her psychiatric team determined she was stable enough for such contact. Linda's response to these conditions surprised everyone. Rather than arguing or trying to negotiate for earlier contact, she embraced the requirements with enthusiasm that suggested genuine commitment to change. "I want to earn the right to be in Jake and Sophie's lives," she wrote in her next letter. "I understand that trust must be rebuilt through consistent action over time, not through promises or apologies." Linda enrolled in a volunteer program that paired reformed offenders with families affected by property crimes. Her role was to help other perpetrators understand the real impact of their actions on victims, drawing from her own experience of both causing and experiencing violation and theft. The monthly reports we received from her volunteer coordinator painted a picture of someone genuinely committed to making amends through service. Linda spent her weekends helping families secure their homes after break-ins, volunteered at a nonprofit that provided playground equipment to low-income schools, and participated in restorative justice circles where she spoke honestly about the harm she'd caused. Mrs. Martinez has shown remarkable progress in understanding the ripple effects of property crimes, her coordinator wrote in a 6-month evaluation. She's particularly effective at helping other offenders recognize how their actions affect children and families, drawing from her own experience as both perpetrator and victim of theft. But the real test of Linda's progress came in an unexpected way. 8 months after her hospitalization, Linda called David with news that would challenge everything we thought we knew about her journey toward redemption. "David, I need to tell you something," she said during their monthly check-in call. "Someone actually is stealing from me now. Small things, money from my purse, items moved around in my apartment. But this time, it's real." My first instinct was to assume Linda was having another psychological episode, that her paranoid thoughts were returning. But when David asked for details, Linda's response was calm, measured, and backed by evidence. "I installed a security camera after the last incident, and I've documented everything. My downstairs neighbor has been entering my apartment when I'm at work. I have video footage of her taking cash from my wallet and rifling through my belongings." David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Mom, what are you going to do?" Linda's answer would define whether her year of therapy and community service had created real change or merely surface-level compliance. "I'm going to call the police and file a report," she said simply. "I'm going to let the legal system handle it appropriately. And I'm going to make sure my neighbor gets connected with resources for whatever problems led her to steal from me. Because I understand now that hurt people hurt people." The maturity and wisdom in Linda's response took our breath away. She was experiencing actual theft, but instead of becoming paranoid or vengeful, she was responding with both appropriate self-protection and compassion for her perpetrator. When David shared this conversation with me, we both realized that Linda had reached a level of psychological health and emotional intelligence that she'd never possessed before her breakdown. The crisis that had seemed like a setback had actually been a breakthrough, forcing her to confront and heal the deep psychological wounds that had driven her harmful behavior. "I think," David said quietly, "that Mom might actually be ready to see the kids again." The decision to allow supervised visits between Linda and our children wasn't made lightly. We consulted with Dr. Williams, spoke extensively with Jake and Sophie about their feelings and concerns, and established strict protocols for the initial meetings. The first visit took place at a family therapy center in Columbus, halfway between our home and Linda's apartment in Cincinnati. A neutral location with professional oversight felt safest for everyone involved. When Linda walked into the family therapy room that Saturday morning, I barely recognized her. The woman who had once defined herself through designer clothes and perfect appearances was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. Her hair was shorter and unstyled, her makeup minimal. Most importantly, her entire demeanor radiated a calmness and authenticity I'd never seen before. "Hi, Jake." "Hi, Sophie," she said softly, making no move to approach them until they indicated they were comfortable. "Hi, Grandma Linda," Sophie replied politely but warily. Jake studied his grandmother with the careful assessment of a child who had learned to evaluate adult trustworthiness. "You look different." "I am different," Linda replied honestly. "I've learned a lot about myself this year, and I've learned a lot about how my actions affected other people, especially how my actions affected you." The conversation that followed was unlike any family interaction I'd ever witnessed. Linda spoke to Jake and Sophie with a directness and respect that acknowledged their intelligence and their right to have feelings about what she'd done. She didn't try to minimize her actions or make excuses. She didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or affection. Instead, she told them about the community service she'd been doing, helping other families who had experienced theft. She showed them photos of playground equipment she'd helped install at schools that couldn't afford safe play areas. She talked about the letters she'd received from children whose families had been helped by her volunteer work. "I can't undo what I did to your family," she told Jake and Sophie. "But I'm trying to make sure that other children don't have to go through what you went through. I'm trying to help families instead of hurting them." Sophie listened intently, her 6-year-old mind processing this new version of her grandmother. "Are you still sorry about our playground?" "I will be sorry about that for the rest of my life," Linda replied without hesitation. "Not just because I took something that wasn't mine, but because I hurt you and made you feel unsafe in your own home." Jake leaned forward slightly, his posture suggesting he was ready to engage more directly. "Grandma Linda, do you promise you won't take anything from anyone ever again?" "I promise," Linda said solemnly. "And more than that, I promise that if I ever feel tempted to take something that doesn't belong to me, I will call my therapist and talk about those feelings instead of acting on them." The visit lasted exactly 1 hour, and by the end, both children seemed cautiously optimistic about their grandmother's transformation. They didn't hug her goodbye, but they did agree to another visit the following month. As we drove home, Jake and Sophie processed the experience with their characteristic thoughtfulness. "She really does seem different," Sophie observed. "Like she actually cares about how we feel." "I think she learned her lesson," Jake added, "but I want to see if she stays different for a long time before I trust her completely." Their caution was wise and appropriate. Linda had demonstrated significant change, but trust would need to be rebuilt slowly and carefully over time. The most encouraging sign was that Linda herself understood and accepted this reality, showing none of the impatience or entitlement that had characterized her behavior in the past. 3 months later, Linda surprised us with a request that demonstrated just how fundamentally she had changed. She asked if she could bring Jake and Sophie to see the playground she had helped build at Riverside Elementary School, a low-income school in Cincinnati where many families couldn't afford safe play equipment for their children. "I want them to see what I'm doing to try to make up for what I took from them," she explained during a family therapy session. "Not because I think it erases what I did, but because I want them to understand that I'm committed to helping children instead of hurting them." The visit to Riverside Elementary was emotional for all of us. Linda had clearly developed genuine relationships with the teachers and children there, and her pride in the playground she'd helped fund and install was evident. "Mrs. Martinez helped us get the money for our climbing wall," a second grader told Jake and Sophie excitedly. "She comes here every Saturday to help take care of our playground and make sure it's safe." Watching Linda interact with these children, I saw no trace of the controlling, manipulative person who had stolen from our family. She was patient, attentive, and focused entirely on their needs and interests. Most importantly, she showed the same respect for these children's belongings and boundaries that she'd failed to show her own grandchildren. "Grandma Linda," Sophie said as we prepared to leave Riverside Elementary, "I think what you're doing here is really nice." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you, sweetheart. Helping these children helps me remember what being a good grown-up looks like." As we drove back toward Columbus that afternoon, I reflected on the long journey our family had traveled from the morning I'd found our playground missing from our backyard. Linda's theft had shattered our sense of security and trust, but it had also forced all of us to grow in ways we never could have anticipated. We had learned to set firm boundaries while still leaving room for redemption. We had discovered that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it can coexist with appropriate caution. Most importantly, we had shown Jake and Sophie that people can change, but that change must be demonstrated through consistent actions over time, not just promised through words. Linda's psychological breakdown had initially seemed like evidence that she was too damaged to ever fully heal. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the kind of deep, authentic transformation that surface-level therapy alone could never achieve. The woman who now visited our children monthly bore little resemblance to the person who had burned a wedding dress or stolen a playground. She had learned not just to control her harmful impulses, but to channel her energy toward healing the kind of harm she had once caused. Recovery, we had learned, is not a destination but a daily choice. Linda made that choice every day through her therapy, her community service, and her respectful approach to rebuilding relationships with her grandchildren. More importantly, Jake and Sophie had learned that adults can grow and change, that mistakes don't have to define someone forever, but that trust must always be earned through actions rather than granted through hope. The real measure of Linda's transformation came during a crisis none of us anticipated. It was late October, nearly 3 years after the original playground theft, when David received a frantic call from his cousin Tom in Chicago. "David, I don't know who else to call," Tom said, his voice tight with panic. "Someone broke into my house while we were at my daughter's soccer tournament. They took electronics, jewelry, cash. But worse than that, they destroyed Emma's room, tore apart her dollhouse, scattered her art supplies everywhere, even cut up some of her stuffed animals." I watched David's face pale as he listened to Tom describe the senseless destruction. Emma was only 7 years old, the same age Sophie had been, when Linda stole our playground. The violation of a child's personal space brought back vivid memories of our own trauma. "Tom, I'm so sorry. Have you called the police?" "Yes, but they say it's probably teenagers looking for drug money. They don't think they'll recover anything or catch whoever did it." Tom's voice broke slightly. "David, Emma won't sleep in her own room. She keeps asking why someone would want to hurt her toys. I don't know how to help her understand this." After David hung up, we sat quietly in our kitchen, both of us remembering the helplessness we'd felt when faced with explaining Linda's theft to Jake and Sophie. The random cruelty that Tom's family was experiencing felt different from what we'd endured, but the impact on the children was devastatingly similar. "We should drive up there this weekend," I said. "Tom and Sarah could probably use the support, and maybe Jake and Sophie could help Emma process what happened." David nodded, already reaching for his phone to call Tom back, but I stopped him. "David, what if we asked Linda to come with us?" The suggestion surprised even me as I said it. But as I thought about Linda's work with families affected by theft, her understanding of the psychological impact of violation and loss, I realized she might be uniquely qualified to help Emma heal. Are you sure about that? It's a big step and we'd be involving her in another family's crisis." "Think about it," I said, warming to the idea. "Linda understands better than anyone what it feels like to have your space violated and your belongings destroyed. She's been working with families going through exactly this kind of trauma. And maybe more importantly, Emma needs to see that there are adults who will fight to protect children, even when other adults have failed them." David considered this thoughtfully. "What do Jake and Sophie think?" They'd be spending a lot of time with Linda during the drive and the visit. When we presented the idea to our children, their response was immediate and unanimous. "We should definitely bring Grandma Linda," Sophie said with the confidence of a 10-year-old who had learned to trust her own judgment about people. "She knows how to help kids who feel scared about people taking their stuff." Jake nodded seriously. "And Emma needs to know that grown-ups can fix things when other grown-ups break them." The wisdom of our children continued to astound me. They had instinctively understood that Linda's presence would represent not just comfort for Emma, but proof that adults could choose to heal rather than harm. Linda's response to our invitation was characteristically humble and thoughtful. "I would be honored to help," she said during our weekly video call, "but only if you think my presence would genuinely benefit Emma and not just satisfy my own need to be useful. I don't want to insert myself into another family's trauma for the wrong reasons." Dr. Williams, who continued to monitor Linda's progress, endorsed the plan enthusiastically. "Linda has developed remarkable skills in trauma-informed support for children," she told us during a consultation call. More importantly, this would give her the opportunity to demonstrate her growth in a real-world situation where the stakes are high and the focus is entirely on helping others. The drive to Chicago became an unexpected family bonding experience. Linda sat in the back seat between Jake and Sophie, listening to them explain everything they remembered about feeling unsafe after she stole their playground. Rather than becoming defensive or uncomfortable, she engaged with their memories thoughtfully and validated their feelings. "I'm glad you remember being scared and angry," she told them as we crossed into Illinois. "Those were the right feelings to have when someone violated your trust. I hope Emma can express her feelings the same way, because holding them inside would be worse." When we arrived at Tom and Sarah's house, the atmosphere was tense and fragile. Emma, a usually bubbly 7-year-old, clung to her mother's side and kept glancing nervously toward the stairs that led to her destroyed bedroom. Tom greeted us at the door with the haggard expression of a parent trying to hold his family together in the aftermath of senseless destruction. When he saw Linda, his expression became uncertain. "Linda, I appreciate you coming, but I have to be honest, I'm not sure how to introduce you to Emma given everything that happened with David and Emily's family." Linda stepped forward with a directness that surprised everyone. "Tom, my name is Linda, and I'm someone who used to hurt families by taking things that didn't belong to me. I'm here because I've learned how to help families heal after people have hurt them. If Emma wants to talk to me, I can tell her about other children who have gone through what she's experiencing." The honesty was startling and refreshing. Linda had introduced herself by acknowledging her past harm while positioning herself as someone who now chose to help rather than hurt. Emma peered out from behind her mother, studying Linda with the careful assessment that children use to evaluate adult trustworthiness. "Did you really take things from people?" Emma asked directly. "Yes, I did. I took something very precious from Jake and Sophie, and I made them feel scared and sad, just like you're feeling now. Did you say you were sorry?" "I did say sorry, and I've spent a long time learning how to help other children, so I never hurt anyone like that again." Emma considered this information seriously. "Do you think the people who broke my stuff will say sorry too?" "I don't know," Linda replied honestly. "But I know that there are lots of adults who care about making sure you feel safe again, even if the people who hurt you don't apologize." Over the next 3 days, I watched Linda work with Emma in a way that demonstrated complete transformation from the person who had traumatized our own children. She never rushed Emma to feel better or minimize her fears. Instead, she helped Emma understand that her feelings were normal and important. Linda sat with Emma in the living room while the adults worked to restore her bedroom, listening to detailed accounts of which toys had been destroyed and why each one had been special. She validated Emma's sense of loss without trying to immediately replace what was gone. "Some grown-ups think that if they buy new toys, children will stop being sad about the old ones," Linda told Emma as they sorted through salvageable items. "But I've learned that losing something special hurts even if you get something new to replace it." "Exactly," Emma said, her voice animated for the first time since we'd arrived. "My mom said we could get a new dollhouse, but it won't be the same because I won't remember all the little stories I made up about the people who lived in my old one." "Those stories are still yours," Linda said gently. "The people who broke your dollhouse can't take away the stories in your memory. And maybe you can tell some of those stories to the people who live in your new dollhouse." Jake and Sophie had become Emma's constant companions, sharing their own experiences of losing something precious and discovering that life could be good again even after something terrible happened. "When Grandma Linda took our playground, I thought we would never have fun in our backyard again," Sophie told Emma as they worked on an art project together. "But now we have an even better playground, and we know that no one can take it away because lots of people are watching to make sure our family stays safe." "Plus," Jake added with the wisdom of a 12-year-old who had learned important lessons about human nature, "now we know how to tell when grown-ups are trying to help us versus when they're trying to hurt us." "Emma, you're going to be really good at protecting yourself and other kids because you understand how it feels when people are mean to children." The breakthrough moment came on our last evening in Chicago. Emma had been reluctant to sleep in her restored bedroom, preferring to camp out in the living room where she felt safer. Linda asked if she could show Emma something on her phone. "These are pictures of a little girl named Maria," Linda said, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Maria's family came to the United States from Guatemala, and they didn't have much money. Maria had to sleep on the floor because they couldn't afford a bed for her." Emma studied the photos intently. "I helped Maria's family get furniture for her bedroom," Linda continued. "Not because I could give Maria back something that was taken from her, but because every child deserves to feel safe and comfortable in their own space." Linda showed Emma more photos of Maria's furnished bedroom, explaining how volunteers had worked together to create a space where Maria could feel secure and happy. Emma, what happened to your room was wrong, and the people who did it were mean. But look how many adults came together to fix your space and make it beautiful again. Your mom and dad, your Uncle David and Aunt Emily, Jake and Sophie, me, your neighbors who brought food, the police officer who took the report, even the store manager who gave your family a discount on new furniture. Emma's eyes widened as she considered this perspective. So even though some people are mean to kids, there are more people who want to help kids? Much more, Linda confirmed. And now that you know how it feels when someone hurts your space, you're going to be really good at helping other children who go through the same thing. That night, Emma slept in her own bedroom for the first time since the break-in. She asked Linda to check the locks on her windows and to leave a nightlight on in the hallway, but she was ready to reclaim her space. During the drive home, Jake and Sophie reflected on the experience with their characteristic thoughtfulness. Grandma Linda was really good at helping Emma, Sophie observed. It's like she knows exactly what to say to kids who are scared. I think it's because she remembers how she made us feel scared, Jake replied. So now she knows how to help other kids stop feeling scared. Linda, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, spoke up from the front passenger seat. Jake, that's exactly right. The worst thing I ever did was make you and Sophie feel unsafe. Now every day I try to use what I learned from that mistake to help other children feel secure and protected. Grandma Linda, Sophie said, I'm proud of you for learning how to help people instead of hurting them. The simple statement brought tears to Linda's eyes, but she maintained her composure as she responded. Sophie, that means more to me than you could ever know. Being proud of helping others feels so much better than being proud of having nice things or controlling other people. 2 months later, Linda called us with news that would test our family's commitment to her rehabilitation in an unexpected way. David, Emily, I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear, she began during our regular Sunday phone call. The police in Cincinnati have asked me to testify in a case involving a woman who stole playground equipment from several families. The prosecutor thinks my testimony about the psychological impact of such crimes could help secure a conviction. My immediate reaction was protective concern for Linda's emotional stability. Testifying about her own crimes in open court could potentially trigger another psychological crisis. Linda, are you sure you're ready for that kind of public scrutiny? I asked. Dr. Williams and I have discussed it extensively, Linda replied. We both think it could be beneficial for my continued healing to take a public stand against the kind of behavior I once engaged in. But more importantly, it could help prevent other families from experiencing what you went through. David leaned toward the phone, his expression thoughtful. What would your testimony involve? I would explain how stealing playground equipment affects children psychologically, drawing from both my experience as a perpetrator and my work with victim families. I would also discuss the patterns of justification and entitlement that lead people to commit these kinds of crimes. The idea of Linda publicly acknowledging her crimes while helping to secure justice for other families felt like a powerful symbol of how completely she had transformed. But it also raised concerns about potential backlash and whether the stress might undermine her progress. What do Jake and Sophie think? David asked. If you testify, it will likely be covered in local news, and their friends might see reports about their grandmother being a convicted thief. When we presented the situation to our children, their response was immediate and unified. Grandma Linda should definitely testify, Jake said, without hesitation. Other kids deserve to have their playground equipment protected, Sophie nodded emphatically. And if our friends find out that Grandma Linda used to steal but now helps people, maybe their grandparents will learn something too. The trial took place in March, exactly 4 years after Linda's original crime. David and I attended to support Linda, while Jake and Sophie stayed home with Bob, who had become an integral part of their daily routine. Watching Linda take the witness stand was one of the most emotionally complex experiences of my life. She wore a simple navy dress and spoke clearly and directly about her own crimes, holding nothing back as she described the planning, execution, and aftermath of stealing our children's playground. I convinced myself that I was helping my family by removing what I saw as an eyesore and safety hazard, Linda testified. But the truth is that I was more concerned with my own sense of control and social status than with my grandchildren's happiness and security. The prosecutor asked Linda to describe the impact of her actions on Jake and Sophie. My grandchildren lost more than playground equipment, Linda said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. They lost their sense of safety in their own home. They lost trust in adults who were supposed to protect them. Most devastatingly, I made them feel that their happiness was less important than adult concerns about appearances and social standing. Linda's testimony about the psychological patterns that led to her crimes was particularly powerful. She described the gradual escalation from small boundary violations to major theft, the self-justification that made each violation seem reasonable, and the entitled thinking that prioritized her preferences over other people's rights. People who steal from families often convince themselves that they're helping or improving situations, Linda explained to the jury, but the reality is that we're prioritizing our own needs and preferences over the well-being of children and families. When the defense attorney cross-examined Linda, attempting to suggest that her testimony was motivated by a desire to reduce her own legal consequences, Linda's response was unequivocal. I have already served my sentence and completed my probation, she said clearly. I am here because I want to prevent other families from experiencing the trauma that I caused. I receive no legal benefit from this testimony, only the opportunity to use my experience to protect children. The defendant in the case was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison, plus full restitution to the affected families. But more importantly, Linda's testimony was credited with helping the jury understand the serious psychological impact of property crimes against families with children. After the trial, Linda was approached by several victim advocacy organizations, asking if she would consider speaking about her experiences at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement and social workers. I want to make sure this is the right choice for our family, Linda said when she called to discuss these opportunities. If speaking publicly about my crimes would be harmful to Jake and Sophie, I will decline these requests. Once again, our children surprised us with their mature perspective on Linda's evolving role as an advocate for crime victims. I think Grandma Linda should talk to police and social workers, Jake said during a family discussion about the speaking opportunities. If she can help them understand how crimes hurt families, maybe they can do a better job of helping other people. Sophie added her own insight with the thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to complex issues. Plus, when Grandma Linda talks about what she did wrong, it shows other people that they can change too. Some of those people might decide to stop hurting families because they hear Grandma Linda's story. Linda's first speaking engagement was at a regional conference for victim advocates in Cleveland. David and I attended, curious to see how she would handle discussing her crimes with an ROA audience of professionals who worked with crime victims daily. Her presentation was remarkable for its unflinching honesty and practical insight. Linda didn't ask for sympathy or present herself as a victim of circumstances. Instead, she methodically explained the thought processes and behavioral patterns that had led to her crimes, helping the audience understand how to identify and intervene with similar cases. Family members who commit property crimes often exploit emotional leverage and family loyalty to avoid consequences, Linda explained to the audience of social workers and law enforcement officers. They use phrases like, "I was just trying to help," or "family takes care of family," to deflect accountability. Linda's recommendations for professionals working with such cases were based on hard-won experience and deep psychological insight. Don't accept family explanations that minimize or justify the crime, she advised. Property theft from family members is often part of a larger pattern of boundary violations and control behaviors. Address the crime directly and hold the perpetrator accountable, while providing support for the victim family to rebuild trust and security. The response from conference attendees was overwhelmingly positive. Several social workers approached Linda afterward to request her contact information, explaining that they worked with families struggling with similar situations and needed resources for both perpetrators and victims. Over the following months, Linda developed a presentation called From Perpetrator to Advocate: Understanding Family Property Crimes that she delivered at conferences, police training sessions, and community workshops throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Her speaking fees were donated entirely to organizations that provided playground equipment and security improvements for low-income families, creating a direct connection between her past crimes and current efforts to help children. "I can never fully repair the harm I caused," Linda said during one particularly powerful presentation we attended, "but I can dedicate the rest of my life to making sure other families are protected from the kind of person I used to be." The transformation in Linda's relationship with Jake and Sophie was gradual but undeniable. By the time Jake turned 13 and Sophie turned 11, they genuinely enjoyed spending time with their grandmother and sought her advice on everything from school conflicts to friendship problems. Linda had become someone they could trust with their secrets and concerns, knowing that she would listen without judgment and offer guidance based on hard-won wisdom about human behavior and relationships. "Grandma Linda understands people really well because she used to be a person who made bad choices," Sophie explained to a friend who was curious about our family dynamics. "Now she helps other people make good choices instead." The annual family camping trip that August marked 5 years since Linda's original crime and represented a milestone in our family's healing journey. Linda joined us for the first time, sharing a cabin with Bob and participating in all the activities she had once deemed beneath her social status. Watching Linda toast marshmallows around a campfire with her grandchildren, teaching Sophie how to identify different bird species, and helping Jake master knot tying techniques, I marveled at how completely she had embraced a version of herself that prioritized relationships over appearances. David said as we sat by the lake watching Linda and the kids skip stones together, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd handled her theft differently? If we'd just accepted her apology and moved on without involving the police?" The question made me consider the alternative timeline, where Linda's crimes went unpunished and unaddressed. I think she would have continued taking liberties with other people's property and boundaries, I replied honestly. The psychological break she had showed us that her guilt was eating her alive even as she tried to pretend everything was fine. Without consequences and treatment, I think she would have escalated until someone got seriously hurt. So in a way, holding her accountable saved her life as much as it protected ours. "I think it saved all of our lives," I agreed. Jake and Sophie learned that adults who harm children face consequences, but also that people can change if they're willing to do the work. Linda learned that she could find purpose and fulfillment through helping others instead of controlling them. And we learned that justice and forgiveness can coexist if everyone is committed to healing. As the evening wound down and we prepared to head back to our cabin, Linda approached David and me with a request that demonstrated how fundamentally her priorities had shifted. "Would it be all right if I started a college fund for Emma?" she asked, referring to Tom and Sarah's daughter whom she had helped after the break-in. "Not to replace what was stolen from her, but to invest in her future. I've been saving the money from my speaking engagements, and I'd like to use it to help children who have experienced trauma." The request was vintage Linda in its thoughtfulness, but completely different from her old pattern of making unilateral decisions about other people's lives. "Have you talked to Tom and Sarah about this?" David asked. "Yes, I called them last week and explained what I was thinking. They're open to the idea, but they wanted me to discuss it with you first, since you're the ones who introduced us." The careful respect for boundaries and consent that characterized Linda's current approach to family relationships was a stark contrast to her previous pattern of taking action first and asking permission later. "I think it's a beautiful gesture," I told her. "Emma could benefit from knowing that positive things can come from difficult experiences." As we walked back to our cabins under a star-filled sky, Jake and Sophie flanking their grandmother and chattering about the next day's hiking plans, I reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought our family to this point of peace and wholeness. Linda's crime had torn our family apart, but it had also forced all of us to grow in ways we never could have anticipated. We had learned to protect ourselves while remaining open to redemption, to set firm boundaries while still allowing room for change, to seek justice while preserving hope for healing. Most importantly, we had shown our children that people are capable of fundamental transformation, but that such change must be earned through consistent action and demonstrated through service to others. The woman walking ahead of us, teaching her grandchildren to identify constellations, bore no resemblance to the person who had burned a wedding dress or stolen playground equipment. She had become living proof that accountability and redemption could coexist. that consequences and forgiveness could work together to create something better than what existed before. Our story was far from over, but it had evolved from a tale of betrayal and theft into something much more profound, a testament to the human capacity for growth, healing, and the choice to help rather than harm. The phone call that would test everything our family had rebuilt came on a crisp October morning, exactly 7 years after Linda first stole our playground equipment. Detective Rodriguez's voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard since the original investigation. "Emily, I need to inform you that Linda has been arrested again," she said without preamble. "But this time, it's not what you think." My heart stopped as I motioned for David to come closer to the phone. After 7 years of Linda's consistent transformation and dedicated victim advocacy work, the possibility of her returning to criminal behavior felt like a devastating betrayal of everything we'd rebuilt together. "What happened?" David asked, his voice tight with concern and dread. "Linda caught her neighbor stealing mail from multiple apartments in her building," Detective Rodriguez explained. "She documented everything with photos and video evidence, then called us immediately. When we arrived to arrest the neighbor, the woman became violent and attacked Linda. Linda's in the hospital with a concussion and some bruising, but she'll be fine." The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by pride. Linda had encountered theft and responded not as a perpetrator seeking to protect another criminal, but as a citizen committed to preventing harm to her community. "The reason I'm calling," Detective Rodriguez continued, "is that Linda specifically asked me to contact you before anyone else. She said she needed her family to hear about this incident from official sources, so you'd know she had nothing to hide." When we arrived at Cincinnati General Hospital, we found Linda sitting up in her hospital bed, sporting a black eye and bandaged head, but smiling as she spoke with a victim advocate who had come to check on her welfare. "I know this looks bad," Linda said as soon as she saw us, "but I need you to understand what really happened. When I saw Mrs. Patterson taking mail from other people's boxes, my first thought was about all the families who might be waiting for important documents or payments that would never arrive." Linda explained how she had spent 3 days documenting the theft pattern before contacting police, ensuring she had solid evidence that would lead to conviction and protection for her neighbors. 7 years ago, I would have either ignored the situation or found a way to benefit from it," Linda reflected as the doctor completed his final examination. "But now I understand that protecting people from theft is more important than avoiding conflict or inconvenience." Jake and Sophie, now 15 and 13, had insisted on coming to the hospital, despite our initial hesitation about exposing them to Linda's injury. Their response to seeing their grandmother hurt while protecting others demonstrated how much they had matured over the years. "Grandma Linda, are you going to be okay?" Sophie asked, gently touching Linda's uninjured hand. "I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. More importantly, Mrs. Patterson won't be stealing from our neighbors anymore." Jake studied his grandmother's bruised face with the analytical mind that had served him well throughout adolescence. "Are you scared that people will think you're a criminal again because you got arrested with someone who was stealing?" "No, Jake. I'm not scared because I know the truth, and more importantly, you know the truth. I've spent 7 years building a reputation based on my actions, not my words. One incident can't erase that foundation." The local newspaper ran a story about Linda's role in exposing the mail theft ring, describing her as a, quote, "reformed offender turned victim advocate who put her community's safety above her own." The article mentioned her history but focused primarily on her current work and her courage in confronting criminal activity. 3 months later, Linda received a commendation from the Cincinnati Police Department for her citizen service in the mail theft case. The ceremony took place in the same courthouse where she had been sentenced 7 years earlier. "Linda Martinez represents the best possible outcome of our criminal justice system," said Chief Patricia Williams during the presentation. "She has transformed personal experience with crime into a commitment to protecting others from similar harm." As Linda accepted the commendation, I looked around the courtroom at the people who had gathered to support her. Families she had helped through her victim advocacy work, colleagues from the nonprofit organizations where she volunteered, neighbors whose mail she had protected, and most importantly, Jake and Sophie, who beamed with genuine pride for their grandmother's courage and integrity. The ceremony marked not just recognition of Linda's recent heroism, but acknowledgement of her complete transformation from someone who harmed families to someone who protected them. During the reception following the ceremony, Jake approached the podium to speak on behalf of our family. 7 years ago, my grandmother committed a crime that hurt our family deeply, he said, his teenage voice clear and confident. But instead of defining her by her worst moment, we chose to give her the opportunity to show us who she could become. Today, we're proud to say that she became someone worthy of our trust and respect. Sophie joined her brother at the podium, adding her own perspective with the wisdom that had characterized her approach to complex family dynamics since childhood. Grandma Linda taught us that people can change completely if they're willing to do the hard work of examining their behavior and choosing to help others instead of hurting them. But more than that, she taught us that second chances are precious gifts that should be honored through service to others. Linda's response to her grandchildren's tribute was characteristically humble and focused on others rather than herself. Jake and Sophie, you taught me that love means accountability, that forgiveness must be earned through consistent action, and that the best way to honor a second chance is to use it to prevent others from experiencing the harm you once caused. As we drove home from Cincinnati that evening, our family reflected on the journey that had brought us from devastation to celebration, from betrayal to redemption. I keep thinking about how different things could have been, David said as we crossed into Ohio. If we had just accepted Mom's apology and moved on without consequences, she never would have gotten the help she needed to become who she is today. And we never would have learned that it's possible to hold people accountable while still believing in their capacity to change, I added. Jake looked up from his homework in the back seat, offering his own insight with the maturity that continued to amaze us. I think the most important thing we learned is that protecting people from harm is more important than protecting people's feelings. When we held Grandma Linda accountable, we protected other families from being hurt by her. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. And when Grandma Linda stopped that mail thief, she protected our neighbors from being hurt by someone else. It's like the same principle, just going in a different direction. The wisdom of our children reflected the profound lessons our family had learned about justice, accountability, and the possibility of redemption when people choose growth over defensiveness. Linda's crime had torn our family apart, but our response to her crime had rebuilt us stronger and more authentic than before. We had learned that love without boundaries enables harm, that consequences can create opportunities for growth, and that the most meaningful second chances are those earned through service to others. As we pulled into our driveway and saw the playground equipment that had replaced what Linda stole, I realized that our story had come full circle. The grandmother who had once terrorized her grandchildren by stealing their playground had become someone they genuinely admired for her courage in protecting others from theft. The empty backyard where I had once stood in shock and anger had been transformed into a gathering place where multiple generations came together to celebrate achievements built on foundations of honesty, accountability, and hard-won trust. Linda's transformation from perpetrator to protector had taken 7 years of consistent action, professional help, and unwavering commitment to putting others' needs before her own comfort. But the result was a family that understood the difference between cheap grace and authentic redemption, between demanding forgiveness and earning trust. Our children had grown into confident young adults who believed in people's capacity to change while maintaining healthy skepticism about promises versus actions. They had learned that the strongest families are often those that have survived the worst betrayals through commitment to truth, justice, and genuine healing. Linda's story proved that people could fundamentally change if they were willing to face the full consequences of their actions and dedicate themselves to repairing the harm they had caused. But more importantly, our family's story proved that victims could choose healing without sacrificing justice, and that accountability and compassion could work together to create something beautiful from something broken. The playground that stood in our backyard was more than just replacement equipment. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of appropriate consequences, and proof that families could emerge stronger from their worst experiences when everyone involved chose growth over comfort. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.